Is your water quality for your cattle actually up to spec? Or is it costing you performance and animal health? Hey, I'm Shay and you are listening to the Casual Cattle Conversations podcast. Today, we are visiting with Miranda Meehan, and we are going to be talking about different water quality. She's going to outline what impacts water quality, what to look for on that analysis, how to test your water, and a lot of other good information. It's a short and sweet episode that's incredibly valuable, especially if you're a producer who's experiencing drought right now. So with that, remember to check us out on YouTube, and let's get to the conversation. Grazing without limits, ranching without boundaries. Unlock the full potential of every acre with Vents, the smarter way to manage your cattle and land. Cut costs, conserve resources, control grazing across even the toughest terrain with virtual fencing that combines real-time herd data with powerful, hands-off precision. Profit, sustainability, and efficiency all in one system. Vents puts smarter grazing at your fingertips, saving you time, effort, and money compared to traditional fencing. Ready to transform your ranch? Learn more at ventsfence.com. Miranda, thank you for joining me today. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast, and I think the topic we're going to be discussing is an important one and maybe one that doesn't always get brought up enough.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I would agree. I think this is something we don't talk about enough within our grazing systems and in livestock production in general.
All right. So to kick it off, when we're looking at really the big picture of water quality and beef cattle production, what is that biggest impact of making sure that water quality is within range and where it needs to be?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of impacts. I think probably the most widespread impact that we're seeing would be differences in performance, because if we have poor water quality, that's going to influence intake, which then is going to result in lower performance of those animals. As different toxicities, which we'll talk about more, increase, then we can see things such as increased abortion rates, central nervous system disorders, and even death of those animals.
Miranda, give the listeners a little bit of a background on who you are and kind of what you do within this area.
Yeah, so I am the Extension Livestock Environmental Stewardship Specialist at North Dakota State University. I'm in the School of Natural Resources and been in this position for 11 years now. And really what I look at is grazing systems. I work in grazing systems and the interactions between the environment and livestock, and water quality definitely falls into that area and is really one of our most challenging factors within our grazing systems because it's limited in availability, and then we run into these quality issues. Since 2019, I've been working with extension agents across North Dakota to screen and monitor water quality for producers in the state.
So when I think about water quality, I mean, I know it matters year round, but I specifically think about it, maybe in those summer months. And on our place, there's spots where there's natural spring-fed water, there's watering holes, which get kind of gross throughout the summer, and then there's, of course, our stock tanks that are connected to a well. So what can impact water quality in these areas? And let's start with maybe those naturally occurring water sources first.
Yeah, so it's going to depend on your geology, honestly, in your area. So whether that's a spring or a dugout, stock pond, creek, whatever that might be as a surface water, it's really going to depend on the geology of that source, especially in the northern plains. We have a lot of high amounts of natural occurring salts, sulfates being one of those salts that can influence the quality of our water. That actually translates to our wells, depending on the geology of the aquifer that we're pulling water from. We can have variability in those constituents, so those salts and sulfates within the water source. Within surface waters, another concern we need to be aware of is high levels of phosphorus and nitrates, which can lead to harmful algal blooms or blue-green algae. And then as we move into the southern plains, we have higher nitrates within both our aquifers and our surface waters.
Okay, is there anything different from what you just mentioned that you want to bring up for, say, a stock tank situation and water quality there?
In a stock tank, it's going to really depend on, are we pulling from in a well, which most people are, and then what aquifer are we pulling from? What's the quality of the water? What's the geologic substrate surrounding it? As a general rule of thumb, we do have higher quality in our well water in the northern plains, but we do see some sources with high levels of sulfates, total dissolved solids. As we move to the southern plains, we have nitrates and leaching into those aquifers that we might have high levels of nitrates we need to be aware of. Obviously, if your well is being fed from a rural water source, that's a different story, and we don't really have any concerns in those situations.
And how often should producers be testing water?
I recommend at minimum prior to turning animals into any pasture, pen, wherever they may be going into, just to know ahead of putting those animals in there that they're safe, the water sources are safe, and they're going to be healthy. I think when we're in a drought situation, which most of the plains are in right now, that we should be looking at things more frequently, because those levels of the salts and sulfates in particular are going to become more concentrated as water evaporates as a result of that drought.
What does the water testing process look like? Is that something extension agents can do for producers? Can producers do it by themselves? What can they expect there?
We have a very simple screening process that we use. All of our extension offices in North Dakota, and I know several other states, have the tools to help do that screening. And so what we use is a handheld TDS meter to see if those total dissolved solids, or the salt mineral component of the water, is elevated. And we look at above 5,000 parts per million as a threshold there, because that is where we start seeing risks of abortions. And then on the sulfate side, we have sulfate test strips, and we just dip those in the water, look at what color they turn, and match that to a scale that's provided on the sampling container. And if those are above, with the tool we use, the strips we use, above 800 parts per million, we recommend that the sample be submitted for testing. So the threshold for sulfates for mature animals is 1,000 parts per million. And then for calves is 500 parts per million when we start to see loose stools, performance things, and as those increase, we have that increased risk for abortions and then ultimately death of those animals. What we recommend then, if you exceed those thresholds, is submitting a sample to lab for further testing, because that'll be more precise than using those screening tools. With the tools are available, if your extension agent doesn't have them, we purchase them off Amazon, so they're readily available and simple to use.
There are few things more important than the land beneath our feet and the farmers and ranchers who work it every day. At Noble Research Institute, we believe those closest to the land are its greatest guardians, and for more than 80 years, we've made it our mission to help them thrive. Noble is the nation's largest nonprofit dedicated to farm and ranch management education. Through applied research, in-person workshops, and on-demand courses, we give producers the tools and knowledge to regenerate their land, strengthen their grazing operations, and build lasting business success. From soil health to stocking rates to bottom line profitability, Noble works alongside farmers and ranchers at every step, because healthy land and profitable operations go hand in hand. Explore our courses and resources at noble.org. Noble Research Institute. Better is possible. So, I know you've talked through various components that you're looking for, but can you just remind us, so say that water analysis comes back, what should producers really focus on?
Yeah, so if we're just doing the screening, we just screen TDS and sulfates. And for those, again, above 5,000 parts per million TDS is when we're starting to see some of those more adverse impacts. Above 800 for the sulfates. And then again, recommending sending those to a lab for further analysis. If it comes back from the lab and those are elevated, they're going to step through those levels, but those are still the levels that we look at, that 5,000 parts per million for the total dissolved solids. And then as it gets above 10,000s when we have a threat of death. And then for sulfates, it's 1,000 where we really are looking at is that threshold. It can be a little higher in a forage-based system because there's not going to be a sulfate or salt coming from the feed of those animals. And so there is a little bit more wiggle room there. But we're going off those thresholds that are set by the National Research Council because there are some differences regionally between what animals are adapted to. So when you send a sample into a lab for analysis, you're going to request a general livestock water quality panel, if they have that, which is going to look at pH, sulfates, total dissolved solids, and nitrates. And I haven't focused a lot on nitrates here, just because in North Dakota we don't see that as a huge challenge, but that is another piece that, depending where you're at, you're going to want to look at as well, because that impacts oxygen uptake in the blood and can result in death.
Very important.
Yes, very.
Thank you for walking through that in detail. And, obviously every producer, if they test water, they want those favorable results. But if a result comes back that is not favorable, what options do producers have, or what should they do next?
Evaluate your grazing system. If you're grazing, fencing out waters that are poor quality. I know that's a lot of work, but it might need to be done. As much as people say animals can recognize a source that has poor quality, they can't. We've had lots of livestock deaths during droughts because of high levels of sulfates. And in appearance doesn't really tell you anything either, because a lot of times our clear waters can have very high sulfates too. And so we can't go off of appearance of that water source either. So fencing off is one option. Hauling water is at least a short-term option. It still allows you to use that grazing resource. And I know with widespread drought right now, that is something people aren't going to want to give up, is their grazing resources. If you are in drought, looking at different programs that can provide assistance to help cover those hauling costs. FSA has a water hauling portion under the ELAP program, so being aware of those options. And then honestly looking long-term at wells, pipelines, rural water taps, options that we can provide a more reliable, higher quality source of water to those animals. I always say to, make sure when you're going to dig a well that you're looking at test well data that's been from wells that are drilled into that same aquifer that you're going to be accessing. Because I've had a couple horror stories in the state where producers have drilled wells and actually had higher sulfates in their surface water because of the water quality in that aquifer. And so there's publicly available test well data. Access that, look at that before you make that decision to drill a well.
Now, is there anything about this topic of water quality that we haven't touched on today that you want to bring up?
The other piece that we haven't spent much time on is cyanobacteria. And especially as we move into summer and hot, dry, stagnant conditions, I also have been seeing, since we've started our monitoring work, that we used to say, the highest risk is really that July-August period. Now it's really extended with longer hot periods. So we've had blooms in October here in North Dakota, which is extremely late because after a freeze, we wouldn't typically expect to see those things happening. But monitoring for those is critical, especially if you have a history of blue-green algae bloom in the past on that source, because often you're going to find a dead animal before you actually realize there's a bloom. And unfortunately, there's nothing you really can do because of how fast the toxins produced by that bacteria are. So there's a liver toxin and a neurotoxin, and they can kill an animal within 15 minutes of consumption. And there's not really a threshold that, if they consume this much, there's really no research on that piece of it. So monitoring your surface waters, understanding what an algal bloom looks like in terms of appearance. We have a publication within an NDSU extension that shows the pictures of the most common types we have here in North Dakota, which tend to look like teal, gloopy paint on the surface of the water, grass clippings, a greenish scum on the water. Those are some of our more common appearing algal blooms. But understanding that and, maybe using technology, whether, something as simple as a trail cam, to monitor that water source and see if there's something present on that water source so that you can get animals away, exclude them from that so that you don't lose any animals.
The trail cam piece is something I know a lot of people use even for water tanks that are far away. They just buy them when they go on sale and then they can check their waters whenever they need to.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of advantages with some of the technologies we have, whether it's as simple as a trail cam or some of the more sophisticated water monitoring systems. Unfortunately, most of them are just looking at levels and not at quality constituents at this point in time.
A question I have with that cyanobacteria, you talked about the later blooms in October. I think about last May, we were having much different weather, and it was actually like 100 degrees for almost a week. I mean, it was really hot that middle of May time. Did you see any early blooms? I mean, I know we were pretty wet last year up here, but...
I don't know if I've seen any in May, but we have had some in the past few years in June. And so it is, with our growing season extending and being a little bit warmer and just more variable, we have seen those blooms earlier and later than we had historically.
Well, Miranda, if there's one thing you want listeners to take away from this conversation, what is that?
Just monitor your water sources. Levels, obviously, I think we all know the importance of making sure animals have water, but it's very simple to screen our water sources, and it can save an animal in the long run.
Well, folks, remember the best way to support this podcast and all your other favorite podcasts is to leave a rating or review, and better yet, share it with a friend who's going to find this information valuable. And by the way, remember to check us out on YouTube as well. With that, happy ranching, and thanks, Miranda.